Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar. Today we'll give you an insight into everything you need to know about completing the 2016 Annual Information Statement. For those of you who might be new to your role in a charity or have not lodged an annual information statement before, this session will give you a great overview of what to expect. My name is April Kitchener and presenting with me today is my colleague Chris Richards, and we are from the Acnc's education team. Welcome, Chris.
Hi everyone. Hi April.
Just a couple housekeeping things to cover before we get underway. First, if you have any troubles with the audio for the webinar, you can try listening through your phone. You can call the number listed in the email you would have received upon sign up and put in the access code and listen to the webinar that way. If you want to ask any questions during the webinar, you can do so at any time by using the tools in the GoToWebinar panel on your screen. We have our colleagues Matt and Nathan on hand and they're ready to answer any questions as they come through. We will try to respond to every question that does come in, but depending on the quantity, as we do have quite a few with us today, we may not be able to get around to every single one. If you do ask a question that isn't answered, don't worry. We do keep a record of all the questions and we'll endeavour to respond to you by email in the hours after the webinar is over. Alternatively, if your question isn't answered, please feel free to send us an email and we'll always get back to you. We will also allow for a quick Q&A session at the end of the presentation today, so if you wanted to watch the presentation before asking your question, that's fine too. We are recording the webinar today and we'll publish the recording, including a copy of the transcript and the presentation slides, on our website in the coming days. So if you need to take off early or if you miss something, you can always come back and watch it again later. You also don't need to write down all of the website references that we mentioned throughout the webinar today, as we'll include those in the follow-up email that we'll send to you following the session today. And finally, we really value your feedback, so if you have any suggestions for ways we can improve our webinars, please let us know in the short survey at the end of the webinar, or also drop us a line via email at education@acnc.gov.au. Well, that's all the admin stuff out of the way, so I'll hand you over to Chris, who will officially kick us off.
Okay, what we'll cover today. Today's webinar will focus on completing the 2016 Annual Information Statement, or AIS, as we'll refer to it throughout the session. We're going to look at a few elements of this process. Firstly, we'll explain what the AIS is and what charities need to report on as part of the process. We'll look at when the AIS is due. Just quickly, for charities on a calendar year reporting period, their AIS is due on or before the 30th of June, and that is next Friday. Importantly, we'll work through how to submit the AIS through the Acnc's charity portal and the information you'll need on hand to help complete your AIS. We'll provide an overview of each section of the AIS so you know what to expect, as well as highlight common mistakes people make when completing their form, as well as how to avoid them. Finally, we'll detail some of the actions the Acnc can take if a charity fails to submit its AIS. But before we look at what might happen if you don't submit your AIS, let's firstly work through the material to help your charity do the right thing and submit its statement on time.
So, what is the AIS, I hear many of you ask? In short, the AIS is an online form that asks questions about your charity's operations and finances. It asks for both financial and non-financial information. So non-financial questions in the AIS cover your charity's activities. So that's basically what your charity does, so your projects and programs, for example. Your beneficiaries, which are the people, groups and communities your charity seeks to help. And your operating locations, that's where you work from and your geographical areas. And also it asks about your governing documents, responsible persons and subtypes. And that's the key information about your charity and who is in charge. So the AIS will just ask you to confirm that all that information is up to date. So the AIS also asks about your charity's finances. So that's questions about your revenue and income, assets, liabilities and the like. For medium and large charities, the level of financial reporting required through the AIS is a little more detailed. So they're also required to submit a financial report with the AIS. And we'll cover that aspect of reporting in more detail further on into the webinar today. Remember though, the AIS is something which all registered charities must submit for every reporting period. The only exception to this is for charities which, well, have an official exception. And that exception covers charities registered with the Office of the Registrar of Indigenous Corporations, or ORIC. And while those charities aren't required to report to the Acnc, they still need to report to ORIC as usual.
So when is the AIS due? The AIS's due date can differ depending on the charity. This is because charity reporting periods, they are the dates to which they report internally, can vary. Two of the more common reporting periods and their corresponding AIS due dates are outlined there on the slide in front of you. Many charities report to the regular financial year, that's July to June. For those charities, their annual information statement is due by 31 December. A number of charities report to calendar year, and for them, their AIS is due by 30 June, a situation many of you joining us today for the webinar are probably in. As you can see, a charity must submit its AIS to us within 6 months of the end of its reporting period. Now, sometimes the Acnc Commissioner might extend that deadline for a short period. One example, those charities which were required to submit their AIS by 31 December last year, they received a month's extension due to the Acnc shutting down over the Christmas New Year period. That meant those charities which wanted to contact us to receive help completing their AIS were not able to do so for a short period of time. But for those charities which are due to submit their AIS by next Friday, June 30, there is not an extension in place. So you'll need to ensure you get your reporting into us by the deadline.
That's right, but what if you're unsure of the reporting period you have recorded with the Acnc or when your charity's AIS is due? Well, there's an easy way to double check. Simply jump online and visit the Acnc's charity register, and that's at acnc.gov.au/charity register. Once you're in there, just type in your charity's name or its ABN and your charity listing will pop up. And on your listing page, you just need to scroll down to the annual reporting section and you'll see a table similar to the one that's on your screen there, and that will list the due dates for your AIS and, if applicable, your financial report as well. And it'll also show whether or not you've submitted the required documents and, if so, when we receive them. So it's a good idea just before you start the AIS just to visit the charity register, just look at your listing and ensure your reporting period is correct, as this will affect when your AIS is due. If you report to anything other than the standard July to June financial year, make sure that you've notified us of that correct reporting period, and if it isn't correct, just log into the Acnc's charity portal and update your information. For more information about reporting due dates, you can always visit the website at acnc.gov.au/reporting due dates.
Now, the charity portal is also the place through which you submit your AIS. As we mentioned before, the AIS is an online form. It's not a physical printed one. It is accessed through the charity portal, which is part of the Acnc's website. Now, because it's not a physical form, you don't have to wait for us to send you out a copy. You don't have to worry about bits of paper, losing bits of paper. You can jump online at a time which suits you, work through the online form and then submit it, and that happens all in the one place. Now, there's 2 or 3 main ways to navigate to the charity portal in order to access the AIS. The first is to simply visit the Acnc's homepage and look for the purple tab labelled Portal near the top right-hand corner. That's highlighted on your screen there with a lovely red arrow. The second way is to look for the large purple Submit the AIS button on the right of the screen. That's also highlighted on your screen with a lovely red arrow. You can also type the portal's URL address directly into your browser, and that is charity.acnc.gov.au. But however you access the portal, you'll end up in the same place.
So this is what you'll see once you've gone through any of those access points. This is the charity portal login page. So to log in, the first thing you'll need to do is accept the terms and conditions of use. Once you've done so, and that's just by ticking the little circular button that you can see highlighted there in the first of the red boxes on your screen, once that's done, you'll be able to log in with your username and password. So your username is your charity's ABN, that's your Australian business number. That doesn't change, that'll stay the same, but just make sure when you type it in, just don't put any spaces between those numbers. Your password, however, that's unique. So that might be something that may have been forgotten or misplaced or not passed on to new committee members during any changes to your board, for example. So if you have forgotten that password, that's okay. You can reset it easily. So the second red box that you can see on your screen there just highlights a couple links, one of which is to reset your password. So just clicking on that link there will take you through a short process which will see you receive a new one. It's pretty easy, but if you need a hand, just give us a call and then remember to keep that password in a safe place so you can use it again.
Once you've logged into the portal, you'll arrive on the portal's homepage, which you can again see on your screen. There's all sorts of information and a number of links for you to look at. To submit your annual information statement, click on the green button on the left-hand side, which is highlighted on your screen. The button is rather sensibly labelled Submit Annual Information Statement. That'll take you straight to the online AIS form. Before we go on, it's worth having a quick look at the rest of the information and links on this page. On the left-hand side, there are quick links to help you change your charity's details or to change your charity's responsible persons. It's important to note that changing these things is not managed through the annual information statement. So if you need to make changes, please do so before you start filling in your AIS. Elsewhere on the page there are some useful general information bits and pieces for your charity, as well as a space near the centre of the page for alerts to appear. If your charity has some overdue reporting, its records aren't up to date, for example a missing governing document, an alert will appear here to let you know.
So at this point you're logged into the charity portal and you're about to hit that Submit Annual Information Statement button. But before you do so, it might be a good idea just to take a moment and check that you have at hand all the information you need to fill out the AIS quickly, easily and accurately. So to get this far, you've already got your charity username and password, so that's great. That's the first thing you'll need sorted. The next thing that we'd recommend having on hand is the 2016 AIS Guide. Now that's easy to find online. We'll have a link to it in the next page of the slide that's coming up. And that guide there just goes through the AIS questions in detail, providing some extra information to help you respond. So it might be a good idea to open up the guide and page park it in a separate tab on your browser, just for easy reference as you complete your AIS. Other information that might be handy will include your annual report or any project reports. They'll just help you answer your questions about your work and purpose, for example. Any pay-as-you-go payment summaries, that should help you with questions about your employee numbers, and any funder, donor or acquittal reports might help, and of course those important financial documents. So that could be your balance sheet or statement of financial position, any statement of profit and loss or comprehensive income.
Now we just mentioned the 2016 reporting page, and here it is on screen. You really can't miss the prominent link to the annual information statement, but those smaller links are all worth a look as well. On the left below the purple Submit Your AIS button, there's a useful checklist which outlines in full the information and documentation you'll need to complete your AIS. Next to that is a link to a worksheet, and that allows you to draft some responses to questions before committing them to the online AIS form. And lastly is that link to the 2016 AIS Guide. It's comprehensive and it's detailed, and it can be used if you're stuck on a question or unsure exactly what is being asked for.
So the final thing that we'd recommend looking at before launching into the AIS itself is just some more resource we have via the Manage My Charity tab on the ACNC's homepage, or in a link as well at acnc.gov.au/reporting. So these resources that are found under that Report Annually option in that drop-down menu on your screen there just go into some more detail about specific elements of charity reporting, the AIS, and various other links to information that can help you fill out the financial section of the annual information statement. So we've just taken a bit of time here to highlight all these support resources and guidance and information that you need before you start. We've just done this to ensure that you're aware of what's available online, just to help you through that AIS submission process, and to ensure that you're armed with everything you need to allow you to fill in the AIS as quickly and easily as possible. So a stitch in time saves 9, as the old saying goes, so being well prepared before you start your work will help make the process that much easier.
Alright, so now you're prepared, ready to go. Here's the first section of the 2016 AIS. It looks at some of the basic charity information. This is relatively simple stuff: name, size, contact information, that sort of thing. Now, better yet, Some of this information will be pre-filled in your form if you've completed your AIS online in previous years. Of course, you can change these pre-filled responses if they aren't accurate, and the information you enter into the 2016 AIS will help pre-populate the 2017 AIS form. Sorry about that. This part of the AIS also asks you to confirm your charity's address for service. Please double check this detail and ensure it is correct. Your address for service is the Acnc's primary contact point with your charity, and where we send notifications and other correspondence such as reminder letters and emails leading up to your AIS due date. Other questions in this section will see you fill in your charity's street address and provide details of your charity's primary contact person. That's the person you wish the Acnc to contact in relation to matters about your charity. You will be asked about the size of your charity based on its annual revenue for the most recent reporting period. And the last question in this section asks if your charity has other purposes which do not fall under the category of advancing religion. Now, more questions about your charity's activities appear in the next section, which is section B.
Yeah, so section B of the 2016 Annual Information Statement focuses on your charity's activities. So that's its work, operations and programs. The first question in this section, question 8, will ask you whether your charity actually conducted any activities during the 2016 reporting period. Now, it's important to remember here that activities can be financial and non-financial, and to understand what we mean when we refer to activities. So we don't look at activities as just those more traditional, very tangible things that a charity does, so things like running a service for homeless people, for example, or any overseas aid work. Of course, these types of charitable work in the field or on the street are indeed classed as activities. But the Acnc also classes activities as any other work that your charity does, like strategic planning, undertaking administrative work, or even just employing staff. These are all considered activities as well. So basically this section, as the slide states there, is just to identify any inactive charities rather. So for all of you with us today, it's probably highly unlikely that your charity will be inactive, so answering yes to this question is most likely the way to go. But if you do answer no, you'll just be asked to explain why your charity didn't conduct any sort of activities in the 2016 reporting period.
Now, other questions in section B focus on activities and beneficiaries. The slide in front of you there, that highlights question 9, which asks charities about their activities during the 2016 reporting period. As you can see, you will be asked to choose your charity's main activity from a drop-down list. This question is mandatory, and if you need help answering it, there's plenty of information in the 2016 AIS guide to help you out. From the drop-down menu, you should choose the category that best suits your charity's main activity. Many charities have multiple main activities, which is where the next part of the question comes in. If your charity does have more than one main activity, you can select more from the list below. And again, you can see that on your screen. The remaining questions in this section will ask you where your charity conducted its activities. That's the locations both within Australia and overseas in which you did your work. They'll also ask you to describe how your charity's activities and outcomes helped achieve its purpose. Often your annual report might contain some good information or a very good rundown you can use to respond here. And you'll also be asked to state who your charity's beneficiaries are, which general or specific section of the community your charity's activities and programs helped. When thinking about beneficiaries, many charities will note that they help a wide cross-section of the community. If that's the case, select the general option as your response to this question rather than the specific option.
So moving on to section C. So this section asks about your charity's very important human resources. That's those who work or volunteer for your charity. So this section is pretty straightforward. You'll just be asked to fill in the number of employees, that's both full-time and part-time, and also your volunteers. So just for reference, full-time employees are those who work 35 or more hours a week, while your part-timers are those who work fewer than 35 hours a week. And keep in mind that volunteers can be regular, so that's the people who work every day, every week or month, or irregular. And it's also important to remember that volunteers can include any unpaid board or committee members. And if you're not 100% sure of the exact numbers, that's okay. Just have a good think and give us your best estimate.
Okay, so we're up to section D, which covers finances. Now this is the biggie for many organisations, and it is also the section of the form which has in the past seen charities make errors with their reporting. Many of these errors are only minor. It might be a missing figure or even just an incorrect number. But what happens is that charities who are identified as having made these mistakes, they have to look over their AIS again, find and correct the errors, and then resubmit it to us. So we stress here how important it is for you to check, double check and even triple check the information and the figures you provide in this section. It's really worth taking the time to get this correct now to make sure you don't have to do it again later. The questions in this section will vary depending on the size of your organisation. There are more questions in this section if your charity is medium or large, as the reporting requirements for those organisations are greater.
Yeah, and it's important to keep in mind that questions in this section of the 2016 AIS are mandatory, and that's except for a few specific types of charities. And they include non-government schools who've opted in to participate in the non-government schools transitional reporting arrangement, and basic religious charities. So basic religious charities are a particular type of religious charity that's registered with the Acnc and meets very specific criteria. There's more information about basic religious charities that can be found on our website.
As we mentioned, the number and types of questions in the financial section of the 2016 AIS vary depending on your size, small, medium or large. Now what is important to note is that the size of a charity is based on its annual revenue. As a reminder, small charities have an annual revenue of less than $250,000. Medium-sized charities are those with a revenue between $250,000 and $999,999, that's a mouthful, and large charities are those with an annual revenue of $1 million or more.
So as Chris mentioned, the Acnc calculates size based on revenue. So just as an overview, revenue is part of an organisation's income, which is created from the sale of goods or services or any other use of capital or assets associated with the ordinary operations of your charity. So it can include things like grants from government, foundations or other organisations, any donations or bequests, any fees for services, any sale of goods, and any interest earned on investments and dividends. So revenue is usually shown among the top line items in an income, profit and loss statement. That's where you'll find it. But if you have any specific questions about your charity's size and revenue, just give us a call on 132262 or email advice@acnc.gov.au and we can answer your questions. So revenue and charity size can be a little bit tricky to calculate, but there is a useful charity size calculator, and that's available on the Accounting for Good website, which can help charities confirm whether they're small, medium or large. So if you're not sure, just double check, and this tool is a good place to start.
All right, now this slide, it offers a bit of a rundown of the financial information we require, I'll try that again, in your financial report as part of the 2016 AIS. For medium and large charities, submitting this information is mandatory. For small charities, it is optional. So for charities with no transitional reporting arrangements, the financial report for the reporting period includes a statement of profit or loss and other comprehensive income, a statement of financial position, of changes in equity and of cash flows. It also includes notes to the financial statements, as well as a responsible person's declaration about the statements and the notes. These must be signed and dated. It includes a reviewer's report or auditor's report, signed and dated, that's for medium charities, or an auditor's report, that's signed and dated, and that's for large charities. Again, note that medium-sized charities have the option of submitting a reviewer's report or an auditor's report, while large charities must submit an auditor's report. Now just to note here too, you'll be asked to upload your financial report at this point. Now you can only upload one financial report, one document in this section. If you have more than one document file, we would ask you to combine them into a single PDF document before you upload them. Now you can look up how to combine documents into single PDF documents online. It's relatively easy to do, and there's plenty of applications out there that will help you do it. Now, the other thing is anything that refers to responsible persons, in this case the declaration about statements and the notes, means that only a responsible person of your charity can provide this information. From an Acnc perspective, a responsible person is a member of the charity's governing body, its committee or its board. They are the people that sit on that governing body and direct the charity and make decisions on behalf of the charity. We've listed a couple of useful links to information about financial statements on the Acnc website, one of which is to a page containing useful templates covering a wide variety of purposes, including some of these financial reporting requirements. And again, the 2016 AIS guide is a great reference point.
Yeah, so we touched earlier on the fact that the financial part of the AIS is often the section which sees many charities make errors. So it's important to keep in mind that the Acnc does check the information submitted in the annual information statements, including the financial information. So it's vital that the information submitted by registered charities is accurate, correct and error-free, particularly as this information is made available to the public on the charity register. So we have compiled a quick list of tips to avoid the more common errors which charities have made in past AIS, and we've also addressed a number of these common problem areas through improvements to the AIS form for 2017. So that's, for example, introducing things like auto-calculation for certain figures and continually refining the guidance and resources which support the AIS. So we should see less and less of these types of errors in the future, but in the meantime, some of the main tips to avoid any errors include: firstly, know your charity size and the financial report type you're required to submit with it. If you're a medium or large charity, ensure you provide all the information required of your size and the financial information as well. If you think you are a basic religious charity, just double check that. Make sure you get it right and assess yourself properly, and if it turns out you aren't a basic religious charity, submit all the information you're required to. Again, the Acnc does check the information you submit. And it might be obvious, but just double and triple check the financial information you enter in Section D of the AIS. So it might be a great idea just to grab another person in your organisation and have them go through the figures before you hit the submit button. A second set of eyes can pick up any errors you may have overlooked or miss a typo or an incorrect figure, for example. And again, remember to submit your financial reports, including financial statements with all the bells and whistles, which we went through a couple minutes ago. So we'll just get rid of those things that are appearing on the screen there. Okay, so moving on.
Sorry about that. Now, as we just mentioned, the Acnc has worked hard to ensure our AIS and reporting guidance is clear, easy to understand and practical. Our top 10 reporting tips are contained at acnc.gov.au/top 10 reporting tips. Now that's the number 10, that's not the word 10. While information about basic religious charities is available at acnc.gov.au/basic religious charity. Now, as you can see on the slide, we have some great guidance specific to each charity size, small, medium and large. You can visit, again, the Acnc site, acnc.gov.au/small reporting or /medium reporting or /large reporting, depending on the size of your charity for this information.
And just for some more guidance that we've got available, this slide here references some other guidance on more specific financial topics relevant to the 2016 AIS. And that includes some guidance on cash and accrual accounting, and that's one of the questions in the AIS, so it's important to understand the differences between the two. We've also got some information on special and general purpose financial statements, and we've got some information on the difference between a review and an audit, as well as the requirements to have one or the other. So depending on your size, you may need to have an audited review an audited financial statement, for example. So again, those links will be included in the follow-up email. So no need to write them down now unless you want to, but if you're unsure still about any of these elements, have a look at the resources and the guidance, but you can always just get in touch with us and we can talk you through it as well.
So we've spent quite a bit of time talking about your reporting obligations and requirements to the Acnc, but it's important to remember that many charities also have reporting requirements to other regulators and authorities. Whether you need to report to other regulators might depend on your legal structure, where you are located and where you are operating. Organisations which are structured as companies limited by guarantee might have obligations to the Australian Securities and Investment Commission, that's ASIC. If you're an incorporated association, you might have obligations to your state or territory regulator. That might be something like Consumer and Business Affairs or Fair Trading, for example. And those fundraising in some states and territories may still have to report to their local authorities as part of any fundraising permit they obtain. Generally, unless you are notified otherwise, the obligation you have to submit the AIS to the Acnc is in addition to any other obligations you might have to other regulators. The good news is that the Acnc continues to make significant progress in streamlining these types of reporting obligations and to cut down on the multiple lots of reporting many groups in the sector have to complete. It's great to see a number of states and territories coming on board with streamlined reporting arrangements, particularly covering fundraising. And there are other regulators that we've already have streamlined reporting arrangements with. We also briefly mentioned ORIC earlier in the webinar. If you are registered with ORIC, again that's the Office of the Registrar of Indigenous Corporations, you can simply just continue to report to ORIC rather than submitting financial information to both the Acnc and to ORIC. And for non-government schools that provide financial reports or a financial questionnaire to the Department of Education and Training, the Acnc will accept that report or questionnaire as meeting our financial reporting requirements.
Okay, so now we move on from the rather involved and technical financial reporting of Section D to Section E, which is far more straightforward and just covers the other obligations your charity has to the Acnc. So this section of the AIS aims to ensure that your details, that the details we hold for your charity are accurate and current. So it'll just ask you about your charity's governing document, and that's the formal document that sets out your charity's rules and processes. You might know it better as your constitution or your rules or articles of association. So you'll just be asked to confirm whether that document that you've supplied to the Acnc is still current, and even whether or not you've supplied us with one in the first place, because doing so is a requirement for a registered charity, so it's important to make sure we have that document and it's the correct and up-to-date version. You also need to check if the responsible persons listed with us are accurate and current. So because they can change regularly, it's easy to overlook, and the need to update them with the Acnc is important to be on top of. So for example, if you've had a board meeting or an annual general meeting and there's been a change in your board or committee, it might well mean that your charity's responsible persons need updating with us. So the third thing to check is your charity's subtype. Charities are registered with the Acnc under particular subtypes, and that's almost like a category or a type of charity which reflects the work that you do. So it's just worth checking that your charity subtype is still accurate, the one that you've got registered with us. So keep in mind though that Section E of the 2016 AIS doesn't actually allow you to make these changes within the form. So what you'll need to do if you need to make a change, you'll just need to exit the form, save your answers as you are now and go back to the charity portal and manage your details from there. It's via the portal that you change these bits of information to ensure they are correct.
Okay, Section AF. AF stands for Ancillary Funds. Now this section probably won't apply to many of you joining us today for the webinar. In fact, it might not apply to anyone with us today. But if it does apply to you, if it doesn't apply to you, sorry, you won't see it when you're completing your AIS form. So you won't be getting confused and that sort of thing. If it does apply to you, completing it will actually replace the requirement to lodge a separate Australian Taxation Office Ancillary Fund return for 2016. However, the information provided in Section AF is not for publication. We'll only be forwarding that information to the ATO.
Okay, so we're at the end of the form now. So the last section of the AIS is Section G, and that just covers the declaration, which basically just asks you to confirm that the information provided in the AIS is true and correct. So before you sign it, just take the chance to double check all the details you've entered are correct. Check that, yeah, we've emphasized this before, but check the financial information again. Perhaps get someone to double check those figures and reread all the information that you've put in there just to make sure there are no errors. Once you're satisfied, that's when you can check the declaration box and hit that submit button. So making sure that you submit the form at the end is also very important. So there have been some charities that have done all the hard work, they've checked over everything, filled out everything as they should have, but in the end they've forgotten to hit that all-important submit button. So they've then received a reminder email, for example, asking after their AIS, and it's only at that point that they've realised they haven't actually submitted the form. So again, just make sure you scroll down to the bottom of the page and hit that submit button. So you'll receive a confirmation of submission email once you have submitted the form. If you don't get one, that's probably a good indication that the form hasn't been submitted. So yeah, just double check that. And once you do have that email, it's probably a good idea to hold on to it for your records as well.
Now, we've taken you through the steps to help you work through and submit your 2016 AIS. But at the same time, we also need to remind people that there are consequences if they don't submit their AIS. We can publish a statement on the charity register, which states that your charity's AIS is overdue. And while it might not be the first course of action we take, we can also issue penalty notices if we find a charity is deliberately not meeting its obligations to report.
So that statement we referred to will take the form of a red mark. So if your AIS becomes overdue by a considerable amount of time, we can put a red mark next to your charity's entry on the Acnc charity register. So this red mark just tells those who view your record on the register that your charity's AIS is more than 6 months overdue. So with more and more people looking at the register to learn about charities, to help them make decisions about donating, volunteering, or even grant funding, having a red mark next to your name can be pretty detrimental. So we do encourage you to get the annual information submitted in a timely fashion to avoid this red mark displaying and, of course, avoiding those hefty penalties that can be issued. And, once you do get your AIS submitted, if you do have a red mark, that will, of course, disappear.
Now, April mentioned the penalties just quickly. This is an outline of some of these penalties. As you can see, there can be a pretty significant financial cost for persistent non-compliance. So even though there are penalties, that the Acnc can reach for in these circumstances, it is unlikely that it's going to happen the day after things become overdue, for example, or for submitting something one day late. But please be aware that persistent non-compliance does bring about the risk of some pretty significant financial penalties.
But as a worst case scenario, not submitting your AIS can put your charity at risk of becoming what we call a double defaulter charity. So double defaulter charities are those charities that have not submitted an AIS for 2 years. And once that happens, the Acnc will work towards revoking a charity's registration. And that's something that will see the organisation lose its all-important charity tax concessions. So you can see there what will happen to your charity's register listing. If your registration with us is revoked, you'll have a red arrow or cross there rather on your listing. So that's probably something you want to avoid. We do display a list of double defaulters on the Acnc website, so that's at acnc.gov.au/double defaulters. We currently have a group of charities listed on that page that will have their registration revoked by the end of this week if they don't comply. So you can go and have a look at that list, and if you see any charities in your area that might be a risk, let us know or get them to contact us so we can let them know what they need to do to avoid revocation.
Now we're getting near the end of the main presentation, but before we do finish up, we wanted to remind you that there are plenty of great resources on the Acnc website. Now there's a list on screen right now, most of which we've covered throughout the webinar. The one I would really recommend you go to is the one at the top, and that's acnc.gov.au/2016 AIS. Now that's the page that links to a number of great resources, including the 2016 AIS guide, and that guide contains full comprehensive comprehensive text explanation of all the questions within the AIS. It also has some great little, I guess we call them how-to videos for each section that explain how you answer particular questions and also look at the information you'll need in order to answer those questions. These important links will be included in the follow-up email we'll send out to you all in a few days' time as well.
So if you do want to stay in touch with the Acnc, there's various ways that you can do so. We have a regular commissioners column that's sent out fortnightly, as well as any other email updates. We have a lot of web guidance, which we've gone through today, some new podcasts coming soon, some more video content along with those how-to videos, and of course lots of webinars such as these. But if you do have any specific questions about your charity, just give us a call between 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. on 132262, and our friendly and knowledgeable advice services team can help you out. And you know, if there's anything troubling you about the annual information statement, they're the best people to speak to. You can also contact them on advice@acnc.gov.au, and we're also pretty active on social media, so feel free to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and you can view our videos on YouTube as well.
All right, now that's pretty much the end of formal proceedings today. We've got some questions that have come through during the course of the webinar. Thanks to everyone who has sent a question through. We've got Matt and Nathan typing away with great speed in the background there to respond to a number of queries, and they'll continue to do so for the next few minutes. But there's a couple of questions that we've received and that continue to pop up, so we thought we'd highlight them and perhaps answer them now. The first one is a pretty straightforward one actually. It's just asking can they have an extension of time to submit the annual information statement. Now, April, did you want to explain about that one?
Yeah, so we understand that the deadline's coming up and there might be some people who think they might struggle to get it in on time, but it's important to note that extensions are only granted in unforeseen extenuating circumstances. So that's something like a serious illness or a natural disaster if you've lost your records in a flood or a fire or whatnot. So the inability to lodge by the due date due to your accountant being busy or yourself not having enough time is probably not going to get you any sort of extension. So yeah, I would just recommend getting it through as soon as possible and talking to us if you think you're not going to meet the deadline. But if you do genuinely need an extension and fit the circumstances, you can apply for that extension by emailing advice@acnc.gov.au and just include your charity name, your ABN, the basis for your extension and the date that you'll have it submitted by. So some more questions have come through. Chris, someone's asking what should they do if they realise they've made a mistake in the AIS after they've submitted it and they want to fix it. Any ideas?
Firstly, I guess we've gone through the webinar a number of ways you can avoid making a mistake, but we're all human, so these things happen, and it's very, very easy to do. What the best course of action is to simply let us know, and the best way to let us know is via email, and again that's to the advice address, advice@acnc.gov.au. Again, if you make sure you include your charity's name, the ABN, and which AIS you want to amend, most likely in this case it's going to be the 2016 one. What we will then arrange for is for the AIS to be put back into what we call the progress or in progress sort of distinction. And that means that you can get back in, you can log into the portal, you can re-access the form, and you can amend your answers, and after you've amended your answers you can then resubmit it. Again, hit that submission button, don't not hit it, and don't fall into further trouble, I suppose. One other question we've got, now we talked about responsible persons throughout the webinar, and this is linked to this question, which is who can sign and submit the AIS? Does it have to be the president or the secretary of a charity? Who's responsible for it?
Yeah, great question. So it doesn't have to be a responsible person like the president or secretary, but they can, of course, submit it if they want to. So it's basically anyone can submit the form who's authorised by the charity to do so. So it can be a responsible person or it can be an authorised person, which is someone who holds a position in the charity that gives them the authority to sign and submit the form. Or it can be an agent, such as a lawyer or an accountant who's been given this authority on behalf of the charity. But I thought I'd just mention now, when we say sign the form, because it's an online form, it's probably just worth noting that you don't physically need to sign it. It's an online form, so you just need to tick that declaration box, and that's how you sign the form before you submit it.
We did have one other question come up through the comments throughout. Someone asking about being registered with ASIC and what that means or how that impacts on their reporting. So charities that are registered with ASIC, they don't need to report to ASIC. As part of the implementation of the Acnc and its establishment, certain requirements in the Corporations Act, they were switched off for companies that are also registered charities. So this means that companies registered with the Acnc do not need to send any financial reports to ASIC, but they do need to submit an annual information statement to the Acnc and a financial report if required. Now, because they no longer need to report to ASIC, they also no longer have to do a number of things actually. File an annual review, provide financial reports, pass a solvency resolution, or pay an annual review fee with ASIC. That's handy. Now, there are parts of the Corporations Act that relate to financial reporting that still apply to charities. For further information about that, it's probably best to contact us again via the phone, or advice again on that email address that we've said a few times.
Yeah, so just another question that's come through. Someone's asking, do they need their lawyer or their accountant to submit the AIS? Do they need that professional help? And what I'd say to that is no, not necessarily. Some charities, some of the larger ones in particular, may decide to obtain the services of a professional to complete the AIS, and that's because they have complicated financials and structures and projects. But for the smaller charities out there, for many of you joining us today, the AIS is designed so it can be completed just by anyone closely associated with the charity and knows what's been going on and has access to the finances. So yeah, with all the resources that we've touched on today and with the advice team on hand to answer any questions, that's more than what you'll need to complete it on your own. So yeah, no need to pay someone unless you feel the need to, I would say.
And also, just to ensure you know, it doesn't cost anything to submit the AIS. It's free. We have in the past have had people believe that they've lodged their AIS, they've sent off their paperwork along with a cheque, but they're actually confusing their reporting obligation to perhaps a state regulator or a state-based authority. They're confusing that with the Acnc. So it's important to keep in mind that the AIS is separate to and in addition to any other reporting obligations your charity may have, and we do not require any payment with your submission.
Great. So we're nearly at the hour there. We've wrapped up a little bit earlier than expected, but I'm sure a lot of people are hungry and have lots of other work to do, so we might wrap it up. Thank you to everyone for joining us today and for all your questions that you've sent through. We'll hang around a little bit longer just to answer any last minute questions that come through via the chat box, so feel free to send any more through. But again, if we don't get around to you email us, call us, and we can certainly answer your questions later on. I'll just mention again that we are always looking to improve our education products, so if you had the time, we would really appreciate it if you let us know what you thought of today's session by completing that survey or just sending us an email at education@acnc.gov.au. Well, that's it for now. Thank you to Chris for presenting with me today, and to Matt and Nathan for helping us with all the questions. So we really hope you enjoyed the session today, and we hope to see you again at a future webinar, and I guess bye for now.
See you later all.